pressing him to give up water. And the story goes, I wasn't in the room, is he pounded the table and he said, "Damn it, man, I can lose it, but I can't just give it away." Which is, you got to understand the layers of politics happening and find a way that people can reluctantly accept the deal, which behind the scenes over coffee and a beer, they might tell you they would. You got 20 million people dependent in part on this water, in addition to all the salad, 90% of the salad in, the US in the winter. So it's kind of tough.
Well, a very good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the stream, an unscripted, unedited, free-flowing conversation featuring guests who reject the status quo with a bias for action in the world of water and beyond. My name is Tom Freyberg. I'm an environmental journalist and content creator specializing in water.
And I'm Will Sarney, a water strategy consultant and investor, doing my part to solve wicked water problems.
And a big thanks to our ongoing supporter and sponsor, Raymond James, and our charity partner, Frank Water. And we are delighted to conclude season 8, which has got a focus on legends of water who have made an impact in water through their fruitful careers, with Felicia Marcus, who is the water policy expert and a fellow at the National Academy of Public Administration, and is a former chair of the State Water Resources Control Board, former commissioner president of the Board of the Public Works for the City of Los Angeles. I'm going to take a breath here, Felicia, then I'm going to keep going. Currently a fellow at Stanford's Water in the West program, also named California's Water Czar by the New York Times for your leadership during the California drought. And I didn't even list half of the different things you've accomplished or have been involved in, but I think that's a nice summary of why you are on the show. So welcome, Felicia.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here. Love you guys.
Amazing. So we've got so much we want to sort of talk to you about over the next 30 minutes. But we always start, a bit of a kind of tradition, is like the origin story of whether it's a founder or leader. So it'd be interesting to sort of, before we come into topics like the California drought and how you helped to navigate that, a little bit about your kind of early career path and how you sort of found your way into the wonderful world of water.
Well, it's funny. It's an insane path. I mean, it's a complete accidental career in the sense of, kids don't try this at home. I mean, I started out, I won't even go into how I got into the environmental work too many decades ago, but it was early, right? So we kind of had to create our own paths. And I was a public interest lawyer and determined essentially to use litigation to get environmental progress. And then let's say sewage was my first love. I mean, sewage was my entry drug into water pretty much, because I was just on intake, at the Center for Law. Yeah, I've never said that to you before. That's funny. I was on
No, wait. That's hysterical. That really is just so funny.
Well,
no, go.
No, it's interesting because there are different segments in whatever field you're in, because I've done air and energy and toxics and everything. And even within them, there are segments, and sewage definitely doesn't seem as sexy to a lot of people who are in the fish world and the wild and scenic world, which I've also worked in. But literally I was on club came in telling me about this. I was the junior person at the Center for Law and the Public Interest, and telling me this incredible story in the mid-'80s about how everything you flushed down a toilet in LA ended up in Santa Monica Bay, which is like a shallow bowl. It's just some of it the sludge ended up being out a couple miles further. And he asked me to be their lawyer. And I said, well, I got to go check it out, because I didn't take clients that just wanted to insult decision makers. I wanted people who actually wanted results, because I'm more of an organizer's strategist, and I want to get results with people. So you don't really insult the decision maker to start off if you actually want to influence them. I know that may seem elementary to you, but it's not to everyone. And so I went to go watch them at some hearing, and the woman who founded it, Dorothy Green, who I had known from when I worked on the Hill for a congressman, but on the phone, said, "Oh, I'm glad you're here. I have to go give my testimony." And I got drafted to be their lawyer, very constructive. I knew she was tough but constructive. It's like our thing was you pound the tables, but when somebody sits, you sit. and you figure out how to move forward. You try to get them to want to do what you want them to do. So, make a long story short, this coalition to stop dumping in sewage into the ocean, which was descriptive but not poetic as a name, became a group called Heal the Bay, which is, I would argue, one of the most successful environmental organizations in the country, but really was responsible for this whole turnaround at the city of LA. Long story short, we all focused on this all the time, and ultimately, good lawyering, I like to think. We won some things. We beat this application for waiver, got into a reopened consent decree, negotiated consent decree, and then we're overseeing the consent decree, and a crazy mayor came in, deputy mayor came in, who kind of realized I was right, but also that I really liked working with engineers and that I could translate between engineer and other people, which is really important. And it's kind of important to my career story in any event. So and I was on the Coalition for Clean Air Board. I mean, I did a lot of different issues, including, as a volunteer from a law firm and all of that over time. And make a long story short, that's how I ended up being the president, and then under the LA system, the general manager of the Public Works Department, which is kind of the first of now a lot of environmental and public interest people have gone into government, but this was quite unusual at the time. And it was Tom Bradley and this deputy mayor, who's since deceased,
Oh, wow.
Mike Gage, who, I got to work for Tom Bradley. It was awesome. And he pretty much gave me the car keys and said, get it as clean as you can, kid, because the deputy mayor said, good policy could be good politics. You didn't focus on these issues. You got one more term. Let's do it. And so my remit was to get it as clean as you can, which was just an awesome way to be a leader, because everybody's empowered. We were Heal the Bay. It helped them get money to do what they went to school to do. A lot of growth for all of us, because we realized that they weren't going to the treatment plant every morning for the joy of manufacturing sewage so that they could poison a fish. They were hardworking people who weren't getting the resources they needed to deal with a river of human waste coming at them 24 hours a day, which was the size of the sixth largest river in California. I mean, it's just mindset. And that really affected, especially since we were successful, my whole philosophy about how do you figure out how to work people and get things done, because I had some big wins, early in my career. So that's how I ended up running the Public Works Department. Then, of course, we had, riots, floods, earthquakes. So I became the disaster queen. So it's like, you never know, right, what's going to happen.
So 3 gems, I like sludge. I sludge with my first
as opposed to
love.
biosolids. Yeah.
We've been doing this podcast for years. That's the first time somebody said that. Second, you love working with engineers.
Yes.
It's like you're on a roll here.
Well, it's just cool because it's just a different way to talk. I mean, I had an epiphany working with the chief engineer. We had this great judge who forced us into a room, listened to each other, which meant they had to answer our questions and we had to listen to the answers. And I thought he was blowing us off by answering. I didn't even remember the question anymore. And I was being a brat. And I just said, I'm just going to keep asking this man the same question a different way until he answers it. Again, I'm a lawyer, right? So I figure I'm going to do that. And then I asked it another way, maybe the 5th time, and he answered the question beautifully. And I thought, oh my God, it's just a different language. The guy was answering the question the way an engineer would answer the question to another engineer, not understanding how that felt like being blown off to a non-engineer. And so it's like my whole career has been translating between engineers and humans. And it's a wonderful thing to be able to do.
The language issue is really important. I've had a few conversations over the past couple of weeks about how do we take our jargon and our echo chamber, and Tom and I have talked about this, and convert it into language that the layperson can understand, because we're never going to make any progress unless we sort of break out of this.
I think we need more acronyms in water. There's not enough.
I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah, really, there you go.
Just another acronym that nobody understands apart from its own echo chamber. But I love the comment. Sewage was my first love. Yeah, you're right. Well, we've never heard that in 8 seasons, but
I think that's a tagline.
I love it. I think it's more than that. I think it's the subject title for the entire episode. But do you
Yeah.
think part of there's obviously many reasons for loving it, but the impact you can see from, as you mentioned, sort of cleaning up the situation, helping
Yeah,
get
Santa
more
Monica
money
Bay,
towards
sure.
the treatment, and then obviously you've got the legal element of it. You can see the direct impact if you effectively improve wastewater treatment, right? Because you've got the impact on the
Oh no, I
ecosystem, on
can
the
look at Santa
environment.
Monica
Yeah,
Bay.
yeah.
Yeah, and feel pretty good about it. No, and then you realize that if you can unlock what that is, you can make progress with people on stuff that really everybody, you find what they all really care about. I mean, I think our breakthrough with them as humans was when we said we were walking around the plant and said, "Would you let your daughter swim in the bay?" And they were like, "No." And then it was like, oh, and then you get into a conversation about it. You realize you've created you've othered,
Yeah,
even in
yeah.
just any a job silo. We've presumed what their intent was from the fact that we didn't like the result, and so. Yeah, I've been more like a therapist in the environmental world over time. I mean, so it actually made sense for me to then go
Okay,
to
that's four now.
oh, good. I'm on a roll. No, it made sense to go to EPA after that in the Clinton administration because I got the experience of what it felt like to be regulated by the state and federal government. And then I thought, oh, that's why everybody's so mad because they never took the time to ask what we were doing. They didn't understand the context. They picked the wrong folks to enforce against on things when everybody in the community knows that somebody else is thumbing their nose at them, things like that. No sense of, and so I went as a reformer and I got along with the metal platers. We had to regulate metal platers where we were. It's like, how do you figure out how to get people to move forward and different things. So it made sense. And there I got to work with this whole array of water, including getting drawn into the fights over the San Francisco Bay Delta. And then, part of negotiating the successful Bay Delta Accord in the 90s, which was peace for a while. It wasn't good enough, but it was a lot better than where we were. And it was worth a try. And it made some progress. But that's why then, you know, take out and I did stuff with tribes, which is the best work I'll ever do, and the border, and all kinds of
Mhm.
multi-stakeholder things. The Grand Canyon Visibility Transmission uh,
It-
uh, tra Transport Commission out in the West on air, and I like figuring out how you find those commonalities where you can move forward and make
it-
progress on say 80% of it, and then maybe that's enough and you work on 80% of something else, or you now have a relationship where you can have a productive
it-
conversation about the remaining 20% as opposed to I'm right, you're wrong, admit you're spawn of the devil, which is not a good way to
oh, wait,
advocate or
wait.
make progress.
S-
So,
Spawn of the devil?
well, those people they
I,
come
it,
in as advocates and they just argue 100% they're right and
I,
that the other side is evil. And it's like, well, that doesn't really help a decision maker who's supposed to
I,
balance and represent all stakeholders.
yeah, I, in the front end of my career, I did a lot of Superfund work,
Yeah, makes
and
sense.
that was, obviously contentious.
Hmm.
Um, but you're right. I mean, the key to any progress is, well, let's start with what we both share. We both believe as a way to nibble at the things
Yes,
that we
right.
don't agree on. And so Felicia, how would you, I want to sort of pivot a little bit here, but
Mhm.
we talked about the Colorado Compact before this episode, and like, how would you approach that? I mean, it's moved from, I would say just a couple of years ago, the states saying, yeah, we disagree, but we acknowledge that we need to figure this out because the Colorado is, you know, significantly less able to deliver supply to the region and Mexico. So, I mean, how would you approach that? I mean,
Well,
what's your
it's,
two cents on it?
well, I've been spending time since I went to Stanford, um, going and retooling on the Colorado, doing a little work on nature-based solutions in the Colorado, as you know, but more trying to figure it out because I want to write a comparison between that and Bay Delta because Bay Delta is now behind, whereas in the 90s we were ahead. But it's what works, and maybe even the Columbia, which is a very successful multi-stakeholder engagement. So I've been more of an observer, but going to a lot of meetings and moderating panels and thinking about it. I just haven't done much writing yet. I think it's been interesting to watch. I think it's all about people. I think you have I've observed the same thing, which it seemed like there were the angry words and rhetoric were people staking out their positions. Then they seem to get along again, and now they seem balkanized again, but in different ways. And to me, from having been that 800-pound gorilla who's trying to get people to reach agreement, or I'll do something that they're going to like less, and it works. I think there's not, we don't have that happening. You've had in both the first Trump administration, actually, then the Biden administration, but not yet in the second Trump administration. We've had the Bureau of Reclamation and Interior saying, "Hey, man, you guys got to come up with something, or we're going to do it," which is exactly what they need to do. And I just think there's uncertainty, so it allows people to go into their corners. But I also think there's a point at which people are staking their ground because they don't want to be taken advantage of. So you'll have the lower basin, or at least Imperial, saying, "Hey, we've got law of the river on our side, and if we litigate, we win," which is the harshness of the Western water paradigm. And then you've got the upper basin saying, "Hey, wait a minute, you guys made a terrible deal 100 years ago that assumed there'd be more water than there is, and the way it's set up is wrong, and we haven't even been able to develop on our water." And then if you have the tribes now that are much more engaged than they were, which is a good thing, are saying, "Hey, wait a minute, you all develop based on our water, and so give us our shot at it." So it's a little more complicated than it was too.
Yeah, I think it's wildly contentious now. And so I agree with you. I think if the Interior asserts itself and says this is how it will be done, that might be the best approach. Although, my
they need to.
My personal view is that they need to redo the law of the river. I mean, the compact
they need to do the whole thing.
was wrong when they set it up in, over 100 years ago. And, it's time for a reboot. But, I talked to a lot of water lawyers, and, they're like, that's never going to happen. So I don't know.
A lot of people say that, but people say that all the time. I mean, when you ask what has to happen, I mean, to me, it's not just posturing. It's both. You've got to be willing to be the 800-pound gorilla, but you also have to spend a lot of time one-on-one with people. I mean, the Bay Delta Court happened, I think, for a lot of reasons. There were a lot of heroes, but one of the things my EPA staff and I did is we interviewed all the water agencies and said and figured out individually, figure out what they needed, and then we put together a deal that gave them what they needed, not just what they were asking for, and that was fair. And then that's how the deal came together. You can't expect them just lock them in a room, them to come out of it. You have to both help them figure out what it ought to be one-on-one behind the scenes. And I remember when I interviewed with the governor for something in the Brown administration, I told him I drank more alcohol on behalf of the environment than anybody knew. And it wasn't all alcohol, it was caffeine too, of course. But it's like, unless you really understand what their politics are, you can't help them construct a way out of this war of the worlds. And so you've got to be part social worker, but you also have to be the tough guy who's willing to take the brickbats and not run for office ever, in order to give them someone to blame. And that's a really important role.
Tom, I haven't given you a chance to get words out of your mouth, so why don't you go for it? Because I love this conversation, but
it's just a comment. I think where you both said that the law of the river is perhaps slightly outdated, and actually it needs to be rewritten. But actually, it's so entrenched, and there's so many stakeholders, and it's a very contentious thing. But what would, just looking at this from a British guy looking over the Atlantic and looking
Mm.
at it sort of
Oh
independently,
yeah, it's
not
hard.
fully aware of, maybe a little bit naive coming in as well. But what's stopping the law of the river being rewritten and being rethought?
It,
Well, you have, it's not
property
just,
rights.
yeah, you have it, the West. I can do this briefly now. It's taken me years to be able to do it briefly. It's like, what ended up happening, California is even weirder, but all of the development of the West happened during an era of westward expansion where
Mhm.
water was just another resource to be extracted for development. And so they looked to miners' rules, first in time, first in right, and whoever's senior gets the most,
Right.
however they claimed it and, tacking it to a tree, whatever.
Hmm.
And so, but the folks that claimed it first, are essentially Imperial Irrigation District and Yuma in Arizona and
Hmm.
Bard, I think, early too, but early agricultural districts at the bottom of the river. And so they have the strongest claim to it. And people may disc Southern California, but you also have 20 million urban Californians who are dependent on the river, who are junior. The Metropolitan Water District is junior to Imperial. So people will say, oh, Southern California. It's like, well, dude, I'm sorry. They're the ones who get hurt because they're junior
Right.
within
Right.
California, but they're getting along and doing some good work with Imperial, which is helpful. But so as a result, it's fairly harsh. So when they did these agreements, they overestimated this part of the problem. They overestimated how much water the river was going to develop, even though, John Wesley Powell said, don't rely on this
I,
because it's going to be drought. There are going to be drought years and all of that. And they did anyway. And so they sort of split the river in half between the upper states and the lower states, but they did it by saying, not, we're going to be correlative and we're going to share percentage wise in times of shortage. They said the upper basin has to deliver half the water every year. So, and then the lower basin, was the recipient of building the largest reservoirs in America, in Lake Mead
Hmm.
and Lake Powell. And so they can withstand multi-year droughts where this upper basin doesn't have as
it,
much there. So they feel shorted compared to the lower basin. But in the lower basin, I'll stop because there's equity here too. You got 20 million people dependent in part on this water, in addition to all the salad, 90% of the salad in, the US in the
it,
winter. So it's kind of
it,
tough.
yeah. So, I live in the headwaters state, Colorado. So I was at a Colorado State University conference last week, and this was obviously the hot topic of you know where are we at and where does it need to go. It's fascinating though. It's the it gets to your point about how do you find common ground and get people to negotiate to a solution in good faith, and also your strength. I mean, it seems that that is something that has been a common thread throughout your entire career. And I don't know if it brings you joy, but it certainly seems to make you like you thrive on that.
Well, I
Am I
like being
Craig?
helpful. That's kind of, I've always been a
Yeah.
helpful kid, but I think I like being helpful, but it's helping it's also there's a political aspect to it, which is you're trying to figure out what people's interests really are versus what they have to say in public. And
Right.
any
Mm.
water official, whether an agency or a state official, cannot be seen to be giving their water away. They can't be too nice. And so
Right.
someone else has to figure out what the deal is that they can live with and survive politically, and then you take the heat. So I mean, that's how we got Bay Delta done. It's the, way we structured our Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. So people politically need something to hide behind because they can't look like they're giving away. I mean, I think one of my
Yeah.
deputy mayor that put me in the job later was involved in the Mono Lake negotiations when he was the head of the Water and Power Board, and they were pressing him, pressing him, pressing him to give up water. And the story goes, I wasn't in the room, is he
It-
pounded the table and he said, "Damn it, man, I can lose it, but I can't just give it away." Which is, you got to understand the
wow.
layers of politics happening and find a way
And,
that people can reluctantly accept the deal, which behind the scenes over
and
coffee and a beer, they might tell you they would.
it's sort of like a divorce, no one's happy. I mean, not to bring up that thorny topic, but yeah, it's really fascinating. I mean, I find it fascinating because that's not my world. I don't live in that world. I live in the, corporate water stewardship world, technology, innovation, and investing. So,
Hmm.
so Tom, what do you think?
Yeah, I think is what you're saying, Felicia, is really because you've got these what people are saying publicly, what they have to
Hmm.
say, but you're saying what incentivizes and motivates each of them is very different from your experience, right? So it's actually trying
Well,
to
it's what
find,
they politically, it's the politics of it.
Right.
You've
yeah,
got to find a way to make it viable for them to say yes to something. And it's hard for them to come up on their own. Sometimes they
right.
do, but sometimes they don't, which is why I always say the challenge in these issues isn't the science, the technology, the engineering, or even the
Hmm.
complexity of biology and ecosystem management. The problem is ego system management, which is dealing with the people in that arena. Because occasionally someone is a jerk, but most of the time they're not. They just have different interests and they have different pressures. And if you understand what their
It-
pressures are, you can help them find a way through
So
it. And
so
I
the
like doing that. I
so
like
the
doing that.
instruction of leave the ego at the door sometimes gets
Well, or
ignored,
just
right?
see
Yeah,
the people in the room around you as
right.
opposed to I'm smarter and I'm going to keep repeating my
yeah.
talking points.
So the word jerk is a term of art in negotiating. Yeah,
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah,
So
you can
one of
play spot the jerk too. That's the other thing I like to do in
It,
government, which is you put everybody in a room that has anything to do with it and you ask questions, and then everybody in the room can see who the jerk is and where everything is stuck. Like we did this whole bond acceleration program that I was in charge of in LA, and you've never heard of it. You're welcome. Because I could see that we had to spend billions of dollars on
yeah.
police stations and fire stations and libraries and my $3.4 billion wastewater upgrade. And it got stuck in permitting the same way the private sector does. I thought, well, we got a problem here and if we don't spend the money, we don't spend it well, we're going to have a problem.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
the mayor created this bond acceleration group and I made them all meet. And my staff got really into it, like walked in and first meeting and like threw an accordion. I didn't do this, they did. This accordion sheaf of paper that had the list of every approval that every project needed, and it went all the way down the table. And they said, there's got to be a better way. We've got to do this. So we used our own
wow.
projects as a reason to get them to cut down on what they did, and we got those projects done. I mean, never, not a peep, not a headline, not a question.
Yeah.
But we knew, and I won't say which department it was pretty clear who the jerk was. Which department was just tone deaf to caring about it or whatever, and that then allowed me to talk to the mayor and say, you have to talk to him because he doesn't hear any of us, and
Well,
that
you
was helpful.
you you hear about the litmus test, but it's also the jerk test to
Yeah, spot
see
the
who's
jerk.
revealing and revealing their true colors.
Well,
One
and
of the
sometimes they're not mean, they just don't get it. I
right.
suppose you could call them something other than jerk, but it's just more memorable to call it spot the jerk.
So one of the other sort of events, I guess, that happened early this year was the Los Angeles fires. And you never
Yeah.
really kind of think about I think typically as a big threat, perhaps exacerbated by climate change, but actually that kind of intersection with fires as a threat and water. And I think water really
Hmm.
comes to the fore when it happens at that scale. So given, I guess, your involvement in that region in the past, it'd be good to sort of get your take and 2 cents on what happened and the intersection with water as well.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, some of it is totally predictable, and some of it is luck of the draw, right? So that we know that with climate change, we're going to have more extremes of a lot of things, and
Mm.
that a few degrees temperature rise, temperature is everything when it comes to water in the West, because just a few degrees temperature rise and you lose your snowpack, so you're losing most of your storage. It's not all reservoirs, it's the snowpack that melts out and refills the reservoirs and replenishes the streams and refills groundwater basins at a pace they can absorb over the course of the spring and summer. So, a couple degrees temperature rise, even Fahrenheit, starts robbing you of that timing value, very important in Western water. It also makes all of the soil and the foliage drier. And that in a water sense, it created huge issues for California because then when it rains, the foliage and the soil soaks it all up. And if it's hotter, some of it doesn't even reach the ground, and the word is sublimates back up out of the ground.
Right.
So you get way less runoff from the same amount of snow and rain than you got before. The other flip side is you've got this tinder box of foliage, ready to go. You've got people who live in the urban wildland interface. And then in LA, unfortunately, you also got these huge windstorms, which is also a function of weather and temperature, but it could happen anywhere. You see where the disasters happen, and it's usually a freak combination of things. And here at the urban wildland interface, you don't use fire hydrants up in the wooded hillsides. You use big planes and helicopters to drop fire retardant and water, but it was too windy for them to go up. So you ended up with this, no pun intended, perfect storm with a seemingly unprecedented windstorm. At the same time, you had 18 incredibly dry months in Southern California, and there was no way to prevent this happening once the spark was lit. At the margins, maybe had a couple things been done, but they weren't unreasonable things. Like some of the hydrants need to be upgraded. That's true everywhere. No city can afford to keep everything up to snuff. They'll invest more now, and they had a reservoir out of service for water quality reasons that would have helped at the margins, maybe a house or two or a few houses, but it wouldn't have stopped this windstorm. And then you ended up with this overlay of this crazy connection that the president made between the issues he cared about in the Bay Delta and this firestorm, as if that mattered, and it didn't. And so you had this whole swirling over about the water stuff that is a combination of misinformation and misdirection by politicians, and certainly not just the president, also local person who had lost for mayor the time before, where everybody comes out of the woodwork as opposed to caring for these poor people who were caught in a terrifying situation, both in Altadena and in the Palisades, that had nothing to do with anything they were talking about. And now you have folks, sort of talking about here and elsewhere, do we need to change our codes? Do we need to have bigger hydrants? Do we need to do? But that happens after every disaster, happens after an earthquake. It happens because there's not enough money in the world to bulletproof all of our communities in general, but in particular against climate change. That's why the kind of nature-based stuff that Will and I talk about a lot, and it gives you more resilience than just trying to build bigger treatment plants or bigger filters or bigger levees that are going to fail in the flooding side. And you've got this set of potential to actually do things that might work better, but you've got to create better buffers in the wildland urban interface. Folks have got to have the 5 feet or more between their home and their ornamental landscaping that's going to light their house on fire. They've got to use different building materials and stuff like that if they want to live in a fire zone, and the rest of us can't afford to bulletproof it make housing completely unaffordable. So we're going to have a public policy decision about what's realistic and what we want to guard against and where we want to live. And these are going to be really hard to have because more and more of these things are going to happen, just as we're seeing more fierce hurricanes in the east and moving further north than people are used to generally. We're going to have in California and the West, it's wildfire is our tip of the spear on this sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, we see something similar. I mean, in Colorado and wildfires, rethinking water, based on snowpack changes and so on, and what that means for infrastructure. I mean, you know, it was built for significant snowpack, melt, transport, and you know, supplying the Front Range, which is about 80% of the state's population, maybe even more. So,
Yeah. Well, and then you think about efficiency within that, you know, and if you think about urban efficiency, part of during our drought, in the one in the teens, Governor Brown went long on mandatory conservation rules for urban, excuse me, not to give the water to anybody else, but so that local groundwater and reservoir supplies would last longer in case we were in a 10-year drought. Not popular with the water agencies, very popular with the public. The public was great. And we were able to save 24% in relatively short order once we went mandatory. But the reason he knew we could do that, even though it would be disruptive, was that in urban, at least California, 50% or more of urban water use is outdoor landscaping. And you need it
right.
because of with climate, you need more trees. You don't need green carpets in the middle of the summer or a drought. And that was a huge thing where, you know, like you kill your lawn or your lawn goes brown, it's hard to kill a lawn, and we're going to save that water, which is a lot of what happened. And then you have to turn to leaks, which can lose 10, 20, 30% or more. And then urbans can get by on a lot less water. When you're going to
Right.
agriculture, they can use less water, plant other things, but urban people eat that food, so it's part of our water budget. It's not like
Right.
urban versus ag. So it's a little bit complicated, but there's a lot urbans can do to be more resilient. Just like you plant different things, you create more defensible space
Well,
around your home. You can live in a different place, but you do have to do something. You know, you've got to.
yeah. Well, I mean, that's such a significant trend in the world of water tech, you know, the built
Yeah, it's really
environment.
important.
Yeah, I mean, we have dumb water homes,
Yeah,
period.
that's exactly right. That's very good.
So, I mean,
Yes.
how do we leverage, you know, digital technologies in the homes?
Exactly.
You know, how much water you're using, you know, when you're going to have a leak. That is enabling technology for water reuse in the home, recycling. You know, what, you know, I heard about a new shower tech that just uses very, very little water, but it feels like it's a lot more. So it's this, you know, how do you drive water efficiency, water reuse, while not compromising on the joy of a shower or, you know, whatever it may be. So I don't know. It's fascinating.
Well, and that's a very human
It-
approach. I mean, again, that's paying
well,
attention to what people, an average
yes,
person, as opposed to saying everybody's got to wear a sweater, which didn't go very well during the energy crisis. You say, how do we use technology to do things also more cheaply? You know, like these sensors that can tell you where you're likely to have a leak, allow you to
yeah,
prioritize your leak fixing in a way that saved some communities like 90%. And it doesn't mean they just don't spend the money. It means they can do that much more
right,
faster. I mean, data and tech, big data and tech and diagnostics will allow us, particularly in the urban context, but also the agricultural context, to be more efficient. But then you've got to get people to change. Sometimes it's subsidies, sometimes it's incentives, you know.
Felicia, humanity is the problem. You know,
I don't know if I'd use that word, but yeah.
well, you know,
to
that's a challenge. All right. Well, so Tom,
yeah, no,
closing
it's just
thought?
close. No, I just wanted to quickly add. Did you read the Peter Diamandis commentary on the fires? And you both kind of went into the tech innovation, but really interesting perspective where it's still a little while away, and there is an X Prize on desalination, an X Prize on different areas, and one of them is fire detection and prevention. And he was saying we're a few years away, but eventually with satellite-based data combined with automated drone technology, he said, imagine a future where you've got this rural-based fire that would start, and essentially it would be detected early before it gets to a significant scale. The drone would be auto-deployed and put the fire. And when I've mentioned this to other people, they said, "Oh, that's amazing, but imagine if it goes wrong and you're having a barbecue with friends and suddenly the drone picks it up, comes over and starts extinguishing your local barbecue," right? But I think the thinking of actually there is a challenge exacerbated by climate change.
So what?
Yeah, you get a free shower. But I mean, there's different pieces of the puzzle that if this prize can
And-
help to connect and unlocked, it's an interesting way of
It-
not because solving the problem as you went into the detail, Felicia, is it's a climate issue, it's an infrastructure issue, it's an urban development. It's so much more complicated than we can. It's not a simple problem, but in terms of preventing something becoming way bigger, it's an interesting innovation. So I know we have to have a hard stop now. So
yeah.
Oh my.
Oh,
we were just getting warmed up. I know.
I know.
Right.
We can't go further and then you just cut it apart and use the bits you like.
oh no, we like the whole thing. So
Yeah.
no, we're not cutting anything out. Felicia, a million thanks for this conversation. You know, I love how you think. You know, again, it's a world I don't live in, so I always learn something from you. I will get on your calendar to follow up and chat.
No, that would be great. I love what you guys do, and so I'm very honored to be a part of it. I'm sorry if we went too long in the
Oh
weeds on some
no,
of this
oh
stuff, but
no,
it's like
No,
figuring
not
out
at
how
all.
to make progress is hard because
Right.
Yeah,
people
yes.
get stuck or they're afraid of what they're going to lose as opposed to what they might gain. I mean, that's classic negotiation theory. So you've got to help them.
That's it. All right. I
Felicia,
need to
thanks so
say
much. It's
goodbye.
been an absolute
Thanks a
pleasure.
lot.
And yeah, we'll speak soon.